Good evening, everybody. I'm really sorry that we've kept you waiting. It's John Sweeney here from SESAC in the UK. Sorry for the slight technical delay. James is here, my colleague from LA, and most importantly, we have Mr. Keith Harris here. And Keith, welcome.
Thank you.
So glad that you could join us here today and give us the benefit of your experiences and share a little wisdom.
You're not asking for much, are you?
Well, yeah, I said about a little. No, I did not know you. I didn't. So let's crack on because I'm conscious of we've lost a little bit of time. We'll keep this as informal as possible.
Well, I can overrun if you need to.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. Well, then perhaps Keith, we can just start at the beginning, really. If you could just give a little bit of background to people about how you came to be in this industry we call music, as they say.
Okay. Well, what normally happens in these kind of talks is people say to me, "Can you tell us something about your career?" Right? And it all sounds really strange because I never embarked on this as a career. You know, a career is something to me where you kind of have a plan and it has a beginning and a kind of trajectory. You know, you keep stepping up, and then you get to a certain point, you know, and you say, "Oh, I've had a successful career." That's not what happened to me. What happened to me was that from the age of about 8 or 9 years old, I was just completely besotted, is the word that we would use in England. But I was just really passionate about pop music. Always really liked it, ever since I was a child, and wanted to get involved in it. Now, like most people, when you want to get involved in pop music, you know, you kind of want to be in a band, or you want to be a player, or you want to be an artist, right? And probably the best thing that happened to me was that I realized when I was about 16 that I wasn't good enough. Yeah, I was in a group at school, and I realized quite quickly that I wasn't even the best guitar player in the band, let alone the best guitar player in the world, right? So, but I still wanted to be involved. So, fortunately for me, the band, who were kind of friends of mine, rather than just telling me to get lost, they said, why don't you become our manager? And I really remember hearing myself saying, that's a really good idea, while my brain was thinking, what does a manager do? But you know, I just kind of wanted to be involved, and that's kind of where I started, which was managing some friends of mine who were in a group, and a whole load of things fell into place because, you know, I knew this is kind of, I wanted to spend as long as possible involved in pop music. I mean, when I started, I knew it wasn't going to last more than 5 or 10 years. You know, I knew that, but I wanted to be involved. And then, you know, those years keep rolling by, and all of a sudden you think, hey, I've been doing this for 10 years.
Right.
I've been doing it for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and you have a career.
And you've had quite a career. So the early days, when not managing, and you moved into the record industry first, would that be right? After that,
yeah. Well, what happened? It was those friends of mine who were in a band. I started off as the manager. This was way back in 1972, 73. Right. I was already at university, and at university I had become what they called, because I was at university in Scotland, and in Scotland they call it the entertainment convener, and that is the person that puts on all the shows. You know, they promote the bands in concert for the consumption of the audience. And in those days in the UK, the college circuit was a very, very important circuit for touring groups. So all the major acts were kind of on that touring circuit, and it was almost a part of the professional infrastructure. So I was putting on bands who later went on to become really quite famous and quite popular. I mean, most of the bands won't mean that much to people now, but I put on bands like Thin Lizzy and Yes
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
Wishbone Ash, and these are the kind of level of groups who were touring then, and so I was
Wow.
doing that, at uni, putting the bands on. So when my friends asked me to manage them, I actually had some professional contacts because I'd been in touch. Yeah, I'd been working with some of these bands. So I started managing them. We had no real success. The biggest success that I had managing that group was they got to do a couple of sessions for a very famous English disc jockey called John Peel, right? And John Peel had a show on Radio 1, which is the big pop station in the UK. So we did a couple of live sessions for that show, but we never really got any further than that. And the band started to fall apart, as they generally do when the band has no success. First they start blaming the keyboard player, and then they start blaming the bass
You go
player,
down
and
the
then
list,
the drum,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Right.
and then they start kicking people out and all that kind of stuff. um, and I realized, I mean, again, with some good fortune, I realized that of the people in the band, I was the one that was going to have to try and find some way to survive, because most of the bandmates were quite wealthy and had quite wealthy parents, and had other things to fall back on. I was, I suppose, unusually thinking back on it. I was a black manager of an all-white rock band, which back in 1972 was a very strange thing,
Hmm.
right? So I realized that they were probably going to be able to do something else if this didn't work out. So I then thought, I better get myself a proper job. And so I answered an advertisement in Music Week, which is like the Billboard of the UK, right? And it was an advertisement for a Southern region radio promotions man, probably said man in those days as well, rather than person, um, for Transatlantic Records. So I went along for an interview for this job. I applied for it. I went along for an interview, and again, a sign of the times. The key thing that the interviewer was wanting to know was, who do you know in the music business? And I gave him a few names of agents I'd worked with when I was booking bands as an entertainment convener, and he knew some of them. So he said, "Oh, I know them. Well, I'll give them a call, and I'll let you know next week." I mean, really, that's the nature of the interview. And so I guess he called some of the people who said they knew me, and so I got the job. So I started in a record company doing regional radio promotions. And my job was to drive around the radio stations trying to get the records played. So that's where I started.
So what sort of experiences did you come across traveling around the UK, which of course is
Yeah,
colleagues in the US is a lot smaller, but still, yeah.
Yeah, it's small. I think probably the standout experience, the one that I usually quote, because people say to me, have things improved? Have things changed?
Right.
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 And I always quote the fact that I drove about 90,000 miles in about 15 months doing that job.
I can
And
relate.
the reason was because it was a very small record company. They couldn't afford for me just to take a hotel every night. I was supposed to get what's known as a bed and breakfast, which is a little bit like, Airbnb, but in the days before there was no internet. Yeah. So you had to go and knock on somebody's door. They have an advertisement saying rooms to let, right? And you'd go and knock on the door and say, I'd like to get a room, please. Well, being a black guy doing that in the early 70s, I just was, I think the first week, I think I tried about 10 or 12 places, and somebody said, yeah, okay, you can have a room as long as you're out first thing in the morning. I said, well, yeah, I will be out first thing in the morning. And so after a few days of doing this and finding it really difficult at the end of a working day, not being actually able to get a place, I just used to drive home. So I'd drive 200 miles at the end of the day to get home.
But this wasn't because there was nowhere to stay, or presumably, on your travels.
Oh, it was literally just that trying to get myself booked in on an evening
difficult, right?
was difficult. You
Right.
know, people at that time, that there wasn't a Race Discriminations Act as we know it
Right.
then. So it was not illegal to turn people down on the grounds of race. So people just say, well, no. Yeah.
Right.
So
the availability changed once you arrive.
exactly.
On location.
Exactly.
We kind of get those experiences through through life. Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things that I remember about that job. But it was a great learning experience for me because it was a very kind of lowly record company. It didn't actually have that much commercial pop music. Most of the music that I was taking out was actually English folk music, believe it or not, or English and Scottish folk music. So my job was to find alternative ways to market, rather than just the playlist. And what that meant was that I had to meet a really wide range of people. And that really was a great experience for me, because also it made you think about alternative ways to approach getting a record across, marketing the record, if you like.
Right.
And so it was an intense 15 to 18 months. And what happened there was that I had a record which I was working at the time, which was wrongly, I have to say, but it was put in one of the trade papers as being the most played record in the country. And the trade paper really, they weren't that diligent about how they were doing their playlists. So what they'd done was they would just called round the commercial stations and say, "Are you playing this record by Mary McKenna?" And they'd say, yeah, we've played that. What they didn't say was that they were playing it at 4 o'clock in the morning on the folk music show, not at lunchtime or anytime anybody was likely to hear it. Yeah, but because it was showing up as getting a play on all of these stations, this trade paper had put it down as being the most played record in the country, which it wasn't. Right? But the general manager of the company sent me a memo about the fact that the press office had managed to get a little small 1-column-inch review in one of the trade papers of this record. Like I say, it was a small record company. This was a big deal. The press office had managed to get this 1-column-inch review in Melody Maker, which is one of the big pop music papers, right? So he sent me a memo saying, "Keith, the press office are doing a fantastic job on this record. What are you doing?" I thought, well, I've got this thing that says it's the most played record in the country. So I actually sent him his memo back, and I'd written on it. I'd photocopied the thing saying number one most played record in the country, and I'd written on his memo. I said, "Jack, this is what I'm doing, and I don't think this is bad considering if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys." Well, about half an hour later, I got called to his office, and we had a conversation about it, about my insubordination. And I guess we kind of mutually decided it's probably best if I didn't work at the company anymore. So I walked to the nearest record company, which was less than 100 yards away, right? And it was EMI Records, and it was their licensed label division. Because EMI at that time, as well as being obviously a major label, had loads of smaller labels that they licensed.
Right.
And so I walked into the licensed label division and said, "I'm looking for a job." And the girl on reception said, "Well, what do you do?" This was a different era. You could just walk into a record company. And she said, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I do promotions." And she said, "What have you worked on recently?" Well, I still had my thing saying that I had the most played record in the country. So I said, well,
you weren't lying. You weren't
no,
lying.
exactly.
It was the truth.
So I said, well, I did this, and I showed her this thing.
Right.
She said, oh, well, I'll I'll send this up to the general manager's office if you want to wait. So I sat down in reception, and she sent this up to the general manager's office, and then I got called up, and the guy said, so I hear you do radio promotions. I said, yeah. He said, and what have you done recently? So I showed him the thing again. He'd already seen it, but I showed it to him again. He said, oh, well, this is really interesting. He said, because, you know, one of our licensed labels is the Motown label, right? And the guy who's doing promotions for Motown is just about to leave, right? He doesn't know it yet, but he's just about to leave. So would you be interested in taking the job as head of promotion for Motown? Well, of course, that was like, I mean, just it sounds so far-fetched, but I swear it's true. So he sent me along to see the general manager of Motown then. There's a guy called Julian Moore. We had a conversation. He said, yeah, I'd be interested in you doing the Motown promo job. So
now, Keith, can I interject a minute? Now, is that Motown here in the States or there in the UK?
Basically, it's the same Motown label, but in the UK, Motown it didn't have its own company. It was a licensed label,
right,
through EMI Records. So there was a department in EMI which did Motown. There were 6 of us ran the Motown label at EMI, right? And so it was the same label, the same releases, the same artists, except that it was part of EMI, right? So I mean, for me, I was, it's one of the things you can't quite believe what's happening, right? And to be perfectly honest, it wasn't quite as simple as that,
right?
Because well, exactly. I said, yeah, of course, and they offered me the job, and I had 2 weeks holiday left from transatlantic. So I said, okay, I'll start in 2 weeks. They said, great. So I went on holiday. I came back. I went to EMI to my new job, and I got called in by the general manager again. He said, actually, I'm afraid we can't let you do Motown. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I said, you offered me the job. And he said, well, I had met just before I went on holiday the people who ran Motown International, who happened to be based in London. They were licensing all the Motown labels, outside of the United States. They were responsible for all, for Motown in France and Germany and Holland and Spain and and the UK. So I had, as a courtesy, EMI had sent me to meet them just before I went on holiday. And it turns out that they said they didn't want a black person doing promotions for Motown. It sounds crazy, but that's, I have on very good authority that that's what they decided. Wow. So I said, well, you've already offered me a job. And they said, well, you can come and work for EMI and we'll let you work on some of the other labels, but you can't do Motown. So they gave the head of promotion for Motown job to a girl called Trudy Benson. I think she went on to do something, actually. I think she moved to LA and became an agent. But anyway, so I then ended up being at EMI, but working on some other labels, EMI International, Ariola and Fantasy, and 3 or 4 other labels. And as far as I was concerned, I was obviously a bit disappointed.
Sure.
But I just got on and did my job as well as I could. And then some of the other licensed labels started to offer me work. They said, look, would you mind kind of helping out doing this, doing so. And one of the labels I got us to do was Rocket Records, which was a brand new label that Elton John had just set up, right? And his stuff was going to come out on the label, but he also had some other artists. So Rocket asked me if I wouldn't mind doing promo for them. So I was doing promo for Rocket and the other EMI labels that already asked me to do. And Elton John released his album called Blue Moves. And so I was us to promote Blue Moves alongside the other stuff that I was doing. So when they did the record launch, Elton had a little party in a club called Monkberry's in Jermyn Street in London. And at the party, I was talking to this woman. Oh, no, let me take a step back. At the same time as Elton had Blue Moves, Motown released Songs in the Key of Life. Okay. And what had happened was that the general manager of Motown, the guy that I'd seen who'd offered me the job in the first place, had said to me kind of behind closed doors, he said, look, I know what happened, but I'd really like it if you could come and help with the launch of Songs in the Key of Life. Doing the promo, because I see you've kind of got on well at radio and you've got a good reputation, and you've been working these other labels, and Trudy hasn't actually been doing that well with the Motown stuff. Songs in the Key of Life is obviously a massive album, because Stevie's
Yeah,
first
to
record for a
say the
couple of years.
least. Yeah.
This is a massive album for us. So would you kind of help out? We've got the album launch at Abbey Road in a couple of weeks. Would you help out with all the radio people when they come along, talk to them and keep them happy and point them in the right direction? So I said, sure. So I took on Songs in the Key of Life as well, although it was unofficial. Okay. So I had Songs in the Key of Life, and then I got Blue Moves. So I had Elton John and Stevie Wonder albums, two of the biggest records of the year. And I was the promo guy. So that if you do promotions, that is a great place to be, because basically everybody wants to know you. Yeah.
Right.
So
Of course.
I got sort of accelerated development, if you like. And then I went to the launch of Blue Moves. And at the launch, the guy from Motown International, Ken East, his name was, who had kind of turned me down for the job. He was the one that had said, basically didn't want a black person doing the promo job at Motown.
Right.
So he was at the party, and this is a very small industry in the UK, so that was no surprise to me. And I was just doing my thing, talking to people, and I was talking to this woman for a while, and Ken East came over, and he said, "Oh, I see you've met my wife, Dolly." And I said, "Well, yeah, I didn't know it was your wife, but yes, And she said to him, "Oh, what a charming young man." And the next day I got a phone call from Kenny saying, "Listen, I think we made a mistake. Will you come and take the Motown job?" And that's when I actually became officially head of promotions for Motown.
Wow.
And that was 1976. Right. So I then moved full time across to Motown. So I ended up promoting Songs in the Key of Life, which was obviously fantastic. And I was head of promotions for a couple of years. And about a year into the job, I was in Manchester. And I was actually on tour with Smokey Robinson. Smokey was in the UK. Because obviously when the Motown artists would come over, because America was a long way away in those days, the job of promotions kind of spilled over into artist relations. Because if the artists were in from LA and they're in London and didn't know where to go to dinner or whatever, then I would be the person that would be setting up all that kind of stuff on their behalf. And Smokey had been over a couple of years before with his wife Claudette and his children, and I'd looked after them for 3 or 4 days, and we got on very well. And this time he was on tour. I was in Manchester on his tour, and I got a phone call from the office saying, "Listen, you got to come back down to the office." And I was going, "Well, I can't." Like it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and Smokey had just done sound check. The show was taking place that evening. And they say, "No, listen, you're going to have to come back." I said, "Well, but I'm with Smokey Robinson." I said, "No, listen, we need you back tonight." And I was thinking I was going to get fired again. so I said, "So what's so important?" And they said, "Well, Stevie Wonder's coming into town tonight, and he wants to go out, and we don't know where to take him. Right. So I had to.
Wow.
I
Okay.
tried to drive back down from Manchester because I was the promo guy. I did clubs as well as radio.
Right.
Right. So I was the person who knew the clubs. So I basically drove back down to London that night and met Stevie at a club in Mayfair at about midnight, and we just got on. We were around. We're around about the same age, right? And so we were just two young black people from obviously completely different backgrounds, but we had a lot in common. Our outlook was basically the same, and so we got on very well. And he went back to America. We kept in touch. About 9 months later, was it 9? Yeah, it was about 9 months later. That was after I'd been at Motown for more than a year. And about 9 months later, I got a call from the general manager of EMI again to say, the guy who's currently general manager of Motown is leaving. I always remember, it was the managing director of EMI's licensed label division, a guy called Alan Cope, said, the general manager of Motown is leaving next month. And it might seem to a lot of people that you'd be an obvious choice for the job. But I'm just calling you into my office to say that we're not going to give it to you, so don't bother to apply. I said,
there's a lot of interesting stuff going on over there, man. That's really.
And why was
it
that?
doesn't surprise me, but it's just it's just amazing. That stuff still goes on today.
Yeah,
in different
exactly.
facets, but yeah.
I mean, the point is, it's common. I tell the story more, not because, listen, all this stuff played out well for me, right? In the end, it all worked out very well for me. But what bothers me is there are so many young people and young people of color who are probably experiencing the same thing.
Exactly. And may not have the level of determination that you had, or the fire that you had to continue, or the
good fortune, fortune. Yeah.
Right.
And I tell this story more for those people. So they know that this is what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And you just gonna have to work harder.
Right.
Okay. Keith, there's one thing you made an address to the music industry, general, a very powerful address. And there was one thing that stuck out where you said, I'm not dissatisfied with how things have gone for me. I'm a middle-class black man with the benefit of a British, we call it private for the US, education, and a well-embedded knowledge of how to navigate white society.
Yeah.
Which is a sort of sad thing to have to put in that letter.
Yeah.
Can you just expand on what that means?
Yeah, well, what happens, first of all, not all Black British people have had the benefit of some of the things I had. My father was a surgeon. So I come from a very middle-class background. So a lot of stuff, I know, I know which knife and fork to use, when there's 7 knives and 7 forks. And when there's, wine glasses and champagne, I kind of know, because I have mixed in that kind of society, right? So that kind of gives me an entree where a lot of young people of color don't have that, right? So, so that's all. I was just making it clear that I've had the benefit of a lot of advantages which have enabled me to do stuff, but also you learn things. When I talk about navigating white society, pretty much any person of color will know exactly what I mean. Yeah, it's not good enough to be as good as. You have to be better, right? In my family, we have this little phrase, which is, "Don't be bitter, be better." So so you don't dwell on this stuff like it's an obstacle. You surmount it.
Has this changed at all since? I mean, you've seen it over decades. Has it moved since?
things have changed a bit, of course. I mean, one of the reasons why I told that story about driving the 90,000 miles in 15 months is because most black people in Britain wouldn't recognize that now. That wouldn't happen now. You know, there may still be the prejudice and bigotry, but there is protection in law, right? And so, you know, quite a few things have changed, and things have changed. And I'm seeing when I came into the music industry, when I went to a reception or, you know, one of the music business do's or functions, you know, you could count the black people there on one finger. And then after I'd been in the business for about, you know, a couple of years, you could count them on the fingers of one hand, right? And then you go into tent, and now, and this is things I think is great, is the last couple of times I've been to these kind of do's, I don't even know all the black people. Yeah, there are a lot of young people coming to business. I don't know them, and that never used to be the case.
Right.
You know, we all knew each other, right? And quite often we'd form our own little ghetto in the corner, where we could kind of talk about how things were, right? So yes, things have changed, and things have got better, and hopefully, over the last 12 months, in the aftermath of the whole George Floyd situation, you know, things are starting to change again incrementally. You know, people realize what is no longer acceptable. You know, so yes, there have been changes. Things have got better, not as fast as I'd like,
Right.
but things have
For
got
any
better.
of us.
Yeah.
For many of us.
Yeah.
So Keith, conscious of time, can I take you back a bit, because you mentioned Stevie, and obviously you've had an association with him going back many years now. But can I particularly ask you about Martin Luther King Day and
Oh yeah.
his involvement in that and your involvement with that?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. First of all, yes, when I moved to LA in 1978 to work directly with Stevie, and to give you an example of how things were, just to set the scene, right? Because when I came to LA, I was like a fish on a bicycle. Right? I'd only been to America once. I'd been taken to America actually by a band called the Commodores in 1978. Benny Ashburn, who was managing the Commodores at that time, as a thank you for helping break the Commodores in the UK, he invited me to come and see a couple of their shows, one in New York and one in Washington DC, right? So that was the only time I'd been to America, right? So now I end up moving to America to work directly with Stevie Wonder, right? And I remember this is a story I tell quite frequently, but I remember I'd been there not very long, a few weeks, and Stevie called me up and he said, "Hey man, can you give me a ride to my mother's house?" And you know, first of all, I was driving this huge American car, right, with the steering wheel on the wrong side, and we're driving on the wrong side.
According to whom?
Yeah, exactly. And we're driving on the wrong side of the road, and I'm in LA, right? So I'm thinking, oh, you know, because at that time, and Stevie was arguably the most famous artist in the world, right? And I was nervous, right? So anyway, I said, yeah, okay, yeah. So I go and I pick him up, and he gets in the car, and I said to him, so where does your mother live? He said, I don't know, I'm blind. So it was kind of a sign of things to come. So we got on very well.
Yeah.
That's just to set the scene as to my relationship with Stevie and how we get on. So with the Martin Luther King thing, we were staying at the time. I was living in an apartmental hotel, and Stevie was staying in the same apartmental hotel. I remember he called me one morning. He said, I've got a great idea. And I said, what is it? He said, you know, Congressman John Conyers started this campaign back in the 70s for Martin Luther King Day to become a national holiday. Yeah, I think we should basically revitalize that campaign. We should pick that up and run with it. I said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. This is, I think, 1980. Say, that's a great idea. He said, great, right. Can you arrange it? I was, what? Yeah. Okay, we'll try and do it. So, we set to, I started thinking about, okay, so how am I going to do this? What? So Stevie decided he wanted to do another March on Washington,
Right, I
like the one
remember
that's taking place.
talking
So,
that.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. So I thought, okay, so how are we going to do this? And he had the Hotter Than July album about to come out. So I decided the best thing to do would be to use the album launch as a way to mobilize people. So I did an inner sleeve to the album. And I don't know if, of course, you don't have the vinyl album anymore. I think it's probably still there in the CD. But in that inner sleeve, there's a picture of Martin Luther King. And below the picture, there is an exhortation for people to join us in Washington, D.C. for the march, right? So that was kind of the thing that we used, because the point is, when you're doing these kind of campaigns, what you have to realize is you need allies,
Right.
right? So it's not good enough just for all the people of color to come out. You want to be joined by the wider population. And Stevie crosses, that divide. His fans come from all walks of life, and we needed to reach everybody. So, so I decided that was the best way to do it, was to do this album cover. And then we sort of, at the time, Stevie had a business manager called Ewart Abner, who was a former president of Motown. And Abner managed to organize a press conference in Washington, D.C., where we got people on board, made them understand what we were trying to do. And the campaign kind of snowballed from there, until, eventually, in 1984, Ronald Reagan, of all people, declared Martin Luther King's birthday a national holiday.
So this campaigning, though, went on for some time.
Yeah.
This was what, a tipping point or something?
No, it was, I think, when you do a campaign, you have to be in it for the long run. You can't expect. I mean, even when it was declared by Ronald Reagan to be a national holiday, many states refused to acknowledge it. It took probably another 10 years before it was universally accepted as a new national holiday, 15th of January. So it's a long campaign. It takes a long time to change people's minds.
It's the eternal credit that it has done. Keith, you told a very interesting story when we were talking sort of offline about, in the early days and how things have changed, hopefully for the better, and again, how much they still need to improve. But do you remember when you were a plugger trying to explain how Lionel Richie and the Commodores perhaps weren't the same as Earth, Wind and Fire?
Well,
Sure.
Again, one of the things about being at Motown, right, was that as head of promotion for Motown in the UK, you had a certain comfort, right? And the comfort was that Berry Gordy, Mr. Gordy to me, and everybody else, had made sure that all his artists knew how to behave, how to do interviews, how to do press, all the professionalism of the Motown artist was second to none, right? And I got very comfortable with that. I realized that these artists were on another level. I mean, Motown was kind of in transition then, because just as I joined, the Jacksons left and went to CBS, right? The Commodores were really just breaking through. They'd had a couple of hits. They had Machine Gun, they had Sweet Love. Just to Be Close to You was the current single that I was working on when I first started work at Motown. And obviously the Commodores, they were just about, I mean, Lionel Richie obviously came out of the Commodores, but the Commodores were Lionel Richie, Mylan Williams, Ronald LaPrade, William King, Walter Orange, um, and I remember, oh, Thomas McClary was the other guitar player, right? And I remember taking Just to Be Close to You to radio in the UK and being told, oh, look, we're already playing Earth, Wind and Fire. That's enough of that kind of music. I'm saying, well, how is Just to Be Close to You anything like an Earth, Wind and Fire song? And it was literally just, there's more than 3 or 4 black guys. The music must be of a certain type. Yeah. And we've already got one multiple black guy group that we're playing, so we're not playing that. And it was a serious fight to try and get it played.
But it was obviously one you succeeded in doing. What was the breakthrough?
Well, first of all, you had to, I had to be prepared, and I think this is probably where it was very useful for me to be, being black myself, black and British, right? I was prepared to stick my neck out on this. I wasn't going to take no for an answer, because I knew there was something going on which had nothing to do with the music. And so I challenged Radio 1, which is a national radio station, and pointed out that, the BBC Charter states that there should be no discrimination. Right? And the initial thing, what had happened, I'll tell you very quickly the story. Just to Be Close to You, they wouldn't play it. And then a guy called Jonathan King, who was a kind of British music impresario, now disgraced, but then he was in favor. He did a cover version with a band called 100 Tons and a Feather. And I'd been trying to get the Commodores version played for weeks. He released the 100 Tons and a Feather version, and it was picked as one of the DJ's record of the week and went straight on the playlist. And I freaked out. So rather than put the Commodores version on, they took the other one off. So they didn't.
Wow.
Then they're not playing either version, right? But then the next big record that the Commodores had out in the UK was Easy. And by now I was kind of forewarned, right? And forearmed, and I was determined that Easy was going to be a hit.
Yeah, Easy was such a huge song too. Not to cut you off, that was a major. That was insanely huge.
Well,
they would have been stupid not to play that.
But they weren't going to. I think now, listening to it, everybody can hear that was a hit.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, they weren't going to go with it. And it was actually it was a British DJ called Kenny Everett, who decided that he liked the guitar solo, right? And he made it into a jingle. Right. So, and he had a very, very popular radio show at the time. And every now and again, he'd be, playing between records, and he'd say, "Oh, I feel a bit like," and he'd go, "Ooh, do 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 do," that famous Easy guitar solo, and he used it as a loop. So, and then after a while, he started actually playing the single with the solo in it. And then because he was playing it and it became popular, then Radio 1 started to play it, and it was in fact a hit in the end. But it was a lot of work to try and get there.
Right. Yeah. Keith, let me ask a cool question before we wrap. What would you say was the turning point for radio in the UK to be more embracing of other genres of music, Black artists, and artists of all genres and ethnicities? Because now it doesn't seem to be. Radio 1 plays all types of music. They even have shows that are very eclectic in what they broadcast.
Yeah, well, Radio 1 has always been eclectic. It's always played, a really wide range of music. That was kind of its remit from 1967 when it first started. So it always played, you could hear like a folk song, and then you'd hear a hard R&B song, and then you'd hear a heavy metal song. I mean, Radio 1 had always been like that. But Black artists, and particularly UK Black artists, they always find it very difficult to get through. And certainly to have anything that resembled a career. So you'd have the occasional hit, but no continued support, right? And what has really changed? What has really changed is loss of control because of the internet and social
Right.
media, and
Right.
people were able to actually start marketing things themselves, right? The Radio 1 ceased to be the only avenue to get
Hmm.
support. And so over the last 10, 12 years, people have started to hear stuff that otherwise they'd have had no way of hearing.
Coming in contact with. Right.
Yeah. And that, then proved just how popular this music was.
Hmm.
And and so radio's got used to it and realized actually for young people, this is what they're interested in.
Right. Right.
So I would say
Absolutely.
that's been really the turning point, is that sort of loss of control. Because up
Hmm.
until then, if you didn't get Radio 1, you were finished.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me ask you, because you've done so much in your career, but there was a period where you weren't involved with the music industry,
Mhm.
which must have been particularly frustrating for you.
No, there actually has never been a period when I wasn't involved in the music industry. I've actually been in the industry all, since.
Oh, sorry, I mean, where you were looking for other
16.
positions.
Oh no, I think you're taking that from an open letter, right?
Yeah,
No, well, no, I've always been involved. But I was working for myself, as a manager. I just
yeah,
wasn't employed by a company. No, the
right.
point I was making in my letter was, I just thought it was a point that was kind of worth making, because I went to LA in 1978, right, and was operations manager for Stevie Wonder's company. And I was there for 3.5 years, and then I moved back to the UK in 1982. And like I said, I started my own management company, quite small, but I managed to survive. And what I was pointing out in that letter was that from 1982, when I came back, when I very first came back, there was a tour promoter called Barry Marshall who asked me if I wanted to come and work with his company. Now, Barry, I put the Commodores with him as an act. And then I put Stevie Wonder with him in 1980 when Stevie was touring. So, Barry and I went back a long way. We got on well. He said, do I want to come and work with him? And to be fair, I turned it down. I said, well, to be honest with you, Barry, I want to try and do something for myself, right? But after that, nobody ever offered me a job in the music industry until 2006.
Jeez.
Right?
How long was
That's 1982 to 2006. Well, that's
that? Okay.
25
Yeah,
years,
yeah,
right? Now, the fact, I don't even know whether I've taken it, but what I'm pointing out, the reason I put it in my letter, I cannot think that a white music industry executive would have gone to America and worked for 3.5, 4 years in management with the biggest artists in the world and returned to the UK and nobody offer them any kind of a job, right? I'll say I don't know whether I'd have taken it, but I think it's remarkable
yeah,
that I wasn't offered any job in the music. Lots of my contemporaries and colleagues were offered labels and but I was never. And funny, there's one of my colleagues who was for 12 years. There's another British black. Well, he's actually not British. He's from the Gambia originally. Who was head of legal and business affairs for Sony for 12 years, right? And he, says he's now has his own company, successful law firm, because he's a barrister. Um, but he said all the time he was at Sony, he had ambitions to maybe get involved in running a label or something like that, which often happens. From law to label is quite a common trajectory in the music industry. I'm sure you know, John,
yeah.
right? He was at Sony for 12 years as head of legal and business affairs, never got offered a label or anything other than carry on doing your legal and business affairs.
Oh,
So in the end, he left. And that's the kind of lack of opportunity which needs to be addressed.
Right.
There need to be clear pathways which are just as open to people of color as they are to everybody else. That's the issue I have still. because I think that's what a lot of young executives are now wrestling with.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lutte continue. The
Yeah,
struggle continues.
yeah, exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
it's ongoing. It's ongoing challenge
Yeah, I think
even
that's
today.
that's the thing that really it seriously needs to be addressed.
So in your letter, you're just saying if we're paying attention, that very obviously that's not enough,
Yeah,
and yeah, it needs to be a continuous thing.
yeah.
So if you had some advice to a black person entering the industry now,
Yeah.
facing any of those challenges, what would you say?
Well, a couple of things I'd say. First of all, I actually admire the attitude a lot of young black people now, because they don't put up with what we put up with. I mean, in some ways they don't have to, because we fought a lot of those fights, maybe not quite as openly and brazenly, but you know, we fought a lot of those battles. What I'd say, I think I'd say the same as to any young person in the business, because I think I've said several times tonight how lucky I've been, right? And I truly believe that. But there's a famous South African golfer called Gary Player, and when he was being interviewed, the interviewer said to him, "Gary Player, lots of people say you're a lucky golfer," and he said, "Yeah, that's probably true. But one of the things that I've noticed is the more I practice, the luckier I get." Right? And I've kind of chosen to paraphrase that in the music industry, which is, I have been really, really lucky. But one of the things I've noticed is the harder I work, the luckier I get. Right.
Right.
And that's what I would say to any young person. You've got to have the determination. You've got to work hard. You've got to make yourself so good that you can't be ignored.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah. And learn your business. When you're there, nobody wants you to, we don't want you to fail. We want you to succeed. The way you succeed is be good. Yeah. And don't be an idiot. And I mean that advisedly, because sometimes it is that fine balance
Right.
between being assertive and being over aggressive,
Hmm.
right? Even though you know something's going on, be sophisticated enough to work around it.
Right.
Challenging things head on all the time is probably not the way. Sometimes that's a good idea. Sometimes it's not. Stop and consider. Think of the best route through. There usually will be a way.
Right.
Yeah. And probably most important things, don't give up.
Hmm.
Yeah. If you stay on the pitch long enough, you'll probably score a goal.
So that's soccer for our own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not football, right?
Yeah.
Well, listen, Keith, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
No problem at
Yes,
all.
Keith. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
I very
Appreciate
much.
the insights and look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's
Absolutely.
Thanks for giving
yeah.
us some time. Very much appreciated.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right.
Take care, Keith.
Thank you,
Yeah, bye.
everyone.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye now.